I'm Massimiliano Gioni and Francesco Bonami tonight in a conversation about the work of Maurizio Cattelan. And I think we are going to start. We're both friends of Maurizio since a long time, and I think this conversation will also revolve around our relationships with Maurizio Cattelan's, with the many lives of Maurizio Cattelan. So maybe we can start.
With some. We do a ping pong question. We have two different relationships with Maurizio. We both know him in different years and forms, so we exchange experience. But first of all, I just find out, I would like to inform you, that around here in the area is living Efran Cattelan, who was not the father of Maurizio Cattelan, but was the head of the secret Swiss army during the Cold War. So, yes, I was just informed by a gentleman from the Swiss radio before. So this work is very much about the Second World War and the result of it, so it's interesting. Maybe Mr. Cattelan is here in the undercover. But so we start with the question. The first, when did you met Maurizio the first time?
Well, in my particular case, unfortunately, every time I tell this story, it takes a long time because we met in, I believe, 98 or 98 in Milan when I was an editor at Flashard magazine. And we met because I was doing an interview with Maurizio, and as it's customary, Maurizio wouldn't give interviews or wouldn't give lectures. That's why actually tonight it's also the two of us speaking and not the artist speaking. So we were doing this interview, and at the time, whenever you asked a question to Maurizio, Maurizio had a small computer, and in this computer he had a selection of answers by other artists that he liked. So you ask him something, he said, you know, Francesco Clemente said something interesting about this, and he would like scroll down and use the answer of another artist. And so the interview process would take ages, and at the end of that day, he told me, you know, tomorrow I have to do an interview with the national radio, why don't you do it? And I say, what do you mean? So, yeah, just do it. I'll give you a phone number and they're going to call you. And I say, sure. And so the next day I did this interview on the national radio instead of Maurizio. And then basically for the next, I think, 6 years, I found myself giving all the interviews for Maurizio and writing all his voices and words. And so it was a sort of prolonged exercise in schizophrenia and the beginning of a long friendship. And what about you? When did you meet?
I don't have so complicated thing. I think Maurizio came to New York. I met him, maybe I saw him in Milano, but I really never knew him there. I think I met him in New York. We were living nearby in the same street, and for some reason we got together to another artist, so we started to see each other in New York, and that's the beginning of the end.
And then, well, since it's almost it's a 20 years anniversary, you then included him in the 1993 Venice Biennale.
I included in two biennial, 1993 and 2003. I pointed out that every time I include Maurizio in an exhibition, he gave me always one of his worst work. Or he didn't give me work. Like in 1993, he sold the space that he had to an advertising agency. In 1997, I invited him to the Santa Fe Biennale, where he tested a very successful work that Picasso had, but in Santa Fe he did George O'Keeffe had, that nobody cared about, and it's a work that disappeared almost. In 2003, I invited him, and he did the third portrait on the tricycle that it was working, but when it was not working, it wasn't there. So very few people saw it. So that's the thing. But then I have the honor to have helped him to find title for all his best work. that he never put in my exhibition, including this. Yes. What was the first experience as a curator with him?
Well, as a curator, well, because I was his mouthpiece, you know, and I was his sort of public identity, a lot of our relationship was not a traditional curator to artist relationship. You know, for a long time, I don't remember the first time that he was in a show I curated, but for many, many years, he was, I thought it was an interesting critical relationship because I would give up any critical distance and provide the words for himself and in a way to read the pieces. You know, I thought it was like one step further André Breton and the Surrealist, because instead of like writing a manifesto, I would just even give the words to the artist. But so for a long time, the relationship was not about a curator asking an artist to be in a show or vice versa. I think the first big collaboration was the 6th Caribbean Biennale, which I don't know how many of you remember. The 6th Biennale of the Caribbean was, of course, the first and only Biennale of the Caribbean. It was a project that Maurizio did in St. Kitts, and it was a biennale in which there was no art. So the whole idea was to create the publicity and all the structure of a biennale, to have the artists, to have the invitations, to have the ads, to have the catalog. And the biennale was supposed to happen in St. Kitts in the Caribbean, and then when the biennale opened, there was no art. It was just a museum paid vacation, basically, for all the participants. I was the only one that didn't go, because I was the press office of that event. So in an interesting way, my first collaboration with him was to be a press office and to participate in creating the rumor and the myth of a biennale that didn't exist. So it was a very different, on many levels, it was a role in which I learned a lot about curating, but I would learn being a sort of participating observer and not a curator of that.
You did many projects with him that including the Rome Gallery, the Big Biennial, so it was almost the artists, the parallel artists next to him in the project that were not strictly artistic.
But you know, it's interesting because for a long time when I knew Maurizio, and I don't know when it changed, but for a long time Maurizio was embarrassed to call himself an artist. You know, now I think people think of him as an artist, and he's here next to, I mean, Monet, and I'm sure he's as surprised as us that this is happening. But for a long time I remember he wouldn't say he was an artist, and there was a bit of an embarrassment and maybe a little bit of fear also, and so a lot of things we've done together were not strictly art, and they were not strictly curatorial projects. So like we did the Rome Gallery, which was this gallery that was basically just a name and a tiny space. We did the Berlin Biennale, we did a magazine called Charlie. So it was all projects in which, in a way, I was doing a job that was different from my traditional curatorial job, and he was doing something that was not actually artistic, and he was a sort of third head or third mind that developed. But that, I mean, as you said, it's also typical of Maurizio, not this, because as you said, you lend many ideas for titles, and it's often, when talking with Maurizio, there is Maurizio, but there is also a sort of invisible family that rotates around it. You know? And a lot of his work is about questioning the relationships of power within these systems.
Testing also the function. How much you think in the work, because Maurizio Cattelan always worked very much is with the impact that the work can have on different media. No, it's very important for him, not only the presentation of the work, that is very important, of course, but he is also very much aware that an exhibition sometimes stay up only for a few months, and then goes away, and also very much aware that an exhibition can be seen only by a limited amount of people. So for him, it's always very important the how the work is communicated through the media, through the images. You work at that very much, no? In the way.
Yeah, I mean that's something that also as a curator I think I learned from working with Maurizio. Is one thing that he told me a long time ago was that a work has to have a synthesis so that it can be summarized basically in one sentence. And if you think of Maurizio's work, and it's not, I'm not saying, you know, some critics they say that Maurizio's work are one-liners, and it's not that what I mean. It's a research of a synthesis that makes the piece somehow shareable in different media and in different channels, which I think is also the reason why his works has a sort of penetration quality that makes it very popular also beyond the artwork. And it's this ability of coming up with works that can be described in very few words. You know, for example, is Hitler kneeling down, or the Pope hidden by a meteorite, or a horse with a head hidden in the wall. So often all of them can be transmitted also orally, and you don't need to see them, and that makes them much more pervasive. On the other hand, also Maurizio is very careful in staging the memory of the piece. I think for me it was also very instructive, and I think he was the first artist I met that would do that for each work there is only one image that circulates, so that the image prepares its own life in the media, and that's quite interesting. So that there is the sculpture, but there is its media life that is already arranged, and it's arranged not only to make it communicable, but to make it to also question the media space, so that the image goes in the media space, but it's not completely media friendly, or it is media friendly, but it criticizes the media at the same time.
Well, let's talk about now the contradiction of retirement. We're here a work of art, we have here an exhibition, and yet Maurizio Cattelan announced that he retired from the production of art. So. And in this case, he succeeded very well in maintaining the promises, because he's presenting 5 examples of the same work, and in a new form that become a new work. So he's still retiring, but at the same time, well, how do you feel about this idea of retiring and still be?
Well, when he did the piece for the 1993 Biennale, which was a piece in which Maurizio rented out the space to make money, basically, and the legend is that with that money he then moved to New York. But the title of that piece was "Working is a Bad Job," which I think is a very clear definition of Maurizio's practice, and I think a lot of his work deals with this, on one hand, performance anxiety, and the artist as somebody who's expected to succeed and do more and be a hero, and on the other hand, also the artwork as an emancipation from his working class upbringing, and that is also very present as a theme in the work. So I think this idea of the retirement is another variation on working is a bad job, is a paradox of still working and yet calling yourself out, and it's an escape again from working as a labor and as a condemnation, obligation. But then, because Maurizio is also very smart, he manages to be retired and yet be in the game, and yes. That's why we envy him and hate him every night when we go to bed, because he's doing what we cannot do.
Exactly, he's doing everything he cannot do. Money, not working, and still being very popular and famous. So what do you think of this work that you have behind here?
Well, I think, I was thinking of this work actually as I was looking around the show of Max Ernst, because interestingly enough, there are many horses in Marx, Max Ernst showed, there is a piece that's called "The Horse is a Little Sick," which perfectly works for this piece. There is another piece called "Investigation of a Horse," and there is another piece called "To Forget Everything," and it's mysteriously a horse. And so it's often that way Maurizio has this ability to connect also to art history, maybe because he was a self-taught artist, he didn't study art, he didn't go to any academy, but there is a sort of instinctual reading of art history, and this is a piece that somehow connects to many different art history. I often joke that maybe there are so many horses in his work because he was born in Padua, where there is like the founding image of the equestrian monument with the Donatello monument, and I think there is this tradition of the horse as a heroic monument that returns throughout his work. And I mean, you have written the text for the show and have very much put this piece in a tradition of horses as heroic and fallen images.
Yes, because there's not definitely not an equestrian monument. The horses are always very melancholic, or dead, or sad. There is this kind of identification with the figure of the horses. The horses is this animal in a way that you think, particularly now, that is totally obsolete in a way, because it's not heroic anymore. It's even the horse races going empty now. So it's something that people go to see entertainment. So the horses are very, very this contradictory animal, no? That we look at this as a normal animal, and in fact it's what it is today, horse. And in a way, I think Maurizio identified himself. Maurizio is between his first show with an animal, I think it was in 1994 in New York, with a live donkey in the garden in New York, that very few people remember. And then he stepped in horses. I think Maurizio always said that he feels like a donkey, but there is also this desire to be a horse. And so now that he's very successful, maybe Maurizio is a kind of horse, but in a very trap situation in some way. Or there is a famous horse of Maurizio hanging down from the ceiling, and there is a horse with a pole and stuck in his stomach that was shown in London, I think, once. And then there is this horse that here, these horses. I think the horses are a kind of a self-portrait of him, seen in a historical way. We think that a donkey wishes to be horses. I imagine a donkey looking at the horse and saying, "I wish I was there." And then, but the tragedy is that when the donkey goes with the horse, I think the mule come out, which will not. So Maurizio is a mule, I think. It's the combination of the horse and the donkey. It's a very strong animal, very resilient, and but in between aristocracy and proletariat.
And the mule cannot reproduce itself.
And the mule cannot. I was going to say, and it's sterile, the mule. So
no, but so it's like a bachelor, like a champion bachelor.
It's a bachelor. The mule is the thing of Maurizio, I think.
Yeah, and let's maybe, since we are we are in a temple designed by a great Italian architect who is Renzo Piano. I don't know if we want to discuss the way in which Maurizio relates to Italian culture and history. I think that the biggest irony also of this exhibition is that you're in Italian, that many Swiss people are coming to see, which happens probably once every few centuries. And I think also, in your writing and in your thinking about Maurizio's work, you have often connected him to the 70s and a certain moment in Italian history, and often you have written about how his work presents an image of Italy that is complex and miserable and somehow also endearing. And I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yes, I think that we have here a very strange combination. We have two Italian curators, two different generations here. Then we have inside the building designed by the great Italian architect Lorenzo Piano, with the work of Maurizio Cattelan, that is the most. I know that a lot of Italian artists, living artists, hate this idea, but Maurizio Cattelan is the most famous artist after Caravaggio in Italian history. And I'm not joking, you know, all over the world. I mean, there are many important, and that doesn't mean that I don't say that it's the most important, but in terms of celebrity, it's across the border, almost like Caravaggio.
And he hasn't killed anybody.
And he hasn't killed anybody. Yeah. So I think he is very much an Italian. I compare him with Fellini in a way, or like another director, Emmanuel Olmi, with the capacity of doing Fellini. Let's take Fellini, is more famous. The capacity to do very local ideas, very kind of almost provincial ideas, but transforming them in universal concept of approach. No? Fellini was a director that very rarely traveled. He was building all this film in Rome. They were all related to his childhood and his fantasy, his thing, very Italian, but at the end he was a totally universal phenomenon. And I think Maurizio is the same thing. It's very Italian in a way that he transformed the language of Italy, but then he brings it up on a different level and has an impact more globally.
And what do you think is the image of Italy that Maurizio is? I don't want to make him into a spokesperson of Italy, but it's that interesting, is it?
It's a both. There is this word in English that's called ingenuity, yeah. And I think that's the good side of Italy. Ingenuity, which means geniality. We don't have it in Italian. Yeah. Ingenuity in Italy means naive, and it's interesting because Maurizio presents an image of in Italy fake naivete. But at the same time, inside this fake naivete, there is this kind of geniality that, not because we are Italian, but Italy embodies this thing, you know, which is not always, to be genius is not always good, I mean, because that's how we have also our problem, because we think we are always so genial that we don't need to solve any problem. So I can tell you something. It has been difficult this year at the Venice Biennale not to include Maurizio in some form or shape.
No, I think Maurizio, as far as I know, is the artist who's been the highest number of consecutive Venice Biennales in his life. He was in the 93, he was in 97, 99, 2001, 2003. 2005, no, 2007, I think so. No, 2009, 11, and 13. Yeah. So as a joke, and I think he expected it, as a joke I say that the news of this Venice Biennale was that he was not going to be in it. And, but it's not like a confrontation or anything, it's just a different approach. I read in an interview, it was very funny, say that he's glad he's not in the show because it's a show about forgotten artists and outsiders, and so he's very happy not to be in it, because he had been in it, he meant that he was forgotten or dead or old. It's more interesting, I think, to see that many of the inclusions in the show and a lot of my approach to making shows was born out of conversations with Maurizio, and we did the Berlin Biennale together, and a lot of things I've done with him have taught me how to take liberties towards artworks without stepping onto the artwork, and so I think, and I'm saying it because he's here, the biggest tribute I could give him was to not include is your favorite and least favorite work of Maurizio Cattelan?
My least favorite work, and he knows it very well, is always publication. I can't stand permanent food, I can't stand toilet paper. For whom we do a party tonight? This publication I found him absolutely useless. But that's what makes other work very important. I think there are many works that are important. I mean, from the Dead Squirrel, Bonami I think was one of the first work I encountered in my career as a curator in London in a small gallery, abandoned in a corner of an empty gallery in London. There, I think that was a fantastic work. It's a little squirrel suicidal in his own kitchen. And then we go up to the hall, the 9 marbles bodies, Novecento, the other horse hanging. There are many works that I think, I think they're work that will stay, they will not ever be forgotten, and now they will be forgotten. I have this theory about dust and patina. The theory is that some work of art, that doesn't mean that they're not important in the moment that they're done. They accumulate dust, and the other work, they develop a patina. So I think that Maurizio's body of work, there's many works that will acquire patina, so it means that we'll carry on with time and they will stay there and will be always fresh and new, and other works that accumulate dust, or what I could call it the Duane-Hanson syndrome.
Well, Duchamp collected dust.
Duchamp collected dust, so that's this. And your favorite and your unfavorite work?
My favorite is the first one in the Galleria Neon, which was a space in Bologna, because it's one of his most simple and also confrontational works. It's for his first solo show. Maurizio hung a sign on the door and closed the gallery, and the sign said, "I'll be back soon." And I think on many levels, his career and his work has all been a variation on that, and the fact that again we are here talking about him and he's standing back there is yet another example of being back soon and forcing the public to take responsibility in the absence of the artist. And my least favorite, I don't know, it's, I'm a big fan of the publications actually. I think because also, we don't want to get too confidential, but there are so many interesting stories, so in particular related to permanent food. When I moved to New York, and I moved to New York also because Francesco and Maurizio were very encouraging and told me to go to New York, and Maurizio helped me financially with $300 a month, I think. Because Flash Art was giving me $900 a month. And the first day I went for a sandwich, and the sandwich was at the Second Avenue Deli, and it costed $15. And I called Maurizio and I said, "This is going to be a problem. I don't think I can live here when a sandwich costs $15. And he said, "Yeah, but that sandwich you're meant to have half there, and the other half take it home and have it in the evening." And that's, I think, also Maurizio's very strategic approach to life. But anyway, when I moved to New York, part of what I did was to work with Maurizio in making permanent food, and we would go to Barnes and Nobles, which now seems like prehistory, because it was a bookstore where there were books and people could read. And I think now in New York there's like one Barnes and Nobles left, and basically what we would do, go through books and rip out pages. And Maurizio had a cutter, so we would steal images and then go to his place and work on permanent food, which was all made of literally appropriated and stolen images. And one day we were doing it, and we are leaving Barnes and Nobles with this jacket full of stolen images, and this guy stops me, and it's security, and he's an undercover security guy who takes me down to the basement and starts interrogating me. And Maurizio, of course, in typical Maurizio Cattelan fashion, he managed to sneak out. And I'm downstairs in the basement with this guy that is like saying, we're going to call the police, and I have a visa, so it's like, I'm thinking I'm going to be sent back to Italy. And then Maurizio was very kind, he came back, but smartly enough, he had left all the pages and the cutter outside on the window of the Barnes & Noble, and he came down and sort of convinced the guy not to call the police. But we received this wonderful letter from Barnes & Noble. They say we were banned from every Barnes & Noble in America, and we could not go back, and which we actually didn't do, but there was a but that's why also I'm very affectionate to Permanent Food, because it was really a sort of do-it-yourself. And it was this idea that you can make a magazine with nothing, and that's been very exciting. So my least favorite artwork, I don't think I have one. Probably the one that is secretly working on is like a tandonnet that he will reveal in 20, 30, 40 years.
And do you think that America had an influence on Maurizio's work and language?
Well, again, I don't want to become too biographical or too hagiographical, but I think as a witness, I think it's important that people know also how Maurizio lived and how he went through also the sort of explosion of his success. I mean, I always had a lot of admiration, because as the prices and the things start going crazy at auction, Maurizio, I think he lived with, he shared an apartment with David for how long? Like 30 years. So he was sharing this apartment, and when I moved to New York, it was interesting because the prices were rising, and the more the sort of visibility thing was happening, the less there were things in the apartment. So when I went the first time to his apartment in '98, there was a desk and a chair, and there is a photo of Lina Bertucci in their apartment, in which there is even a night desk. And then as time was going by and the more acceptance his work found, the less things were in the house, until eventually I would go and stay there when I moved away from New York, and in his room there was just a bed, and that was it, and everything was hidden under the bed, and the books were read and given as a present to somebody else. The clothes, once they were done, they would be thrown away. So there was an incredibly disciplined, this is Maurizio trying to make me shut up, there was this very somehow also hurtful exercise in self-discipline that I think was very interesting. So America clearly helped him and made him more pop in a way. I think he helped him streamline also the story around his pieces and make them somehow more aggressive. But I think he also required a lot of discipline on his side and in taking things away. You know?
But America also had always a conflicting relationship with him, no? Some critics still have a problem with his work. I mean, they're trying.
Yeah, we always joke that I think Maurizio had only one article in our forum that was written by Jeff Ryan, probably in 1995.
And one by me, maybe.
No, not in our forum.
I did not one. Yeah? I think so, yeah.
Oh no, you reviewed by an article, it was like 1995, so we always have this ongoing discussion, and there is still a lot of people that don't accept the work, they find it funny.
They consider him, it's interesting because talking about outsider, they consider him still an outsider. No?
Yeah, and the fact that it takes two mediocre Italian curators to talk about him, I think it means he's not completely assimilated in the system, and I think that's what happened to the donkeys with the thick accents, like us. So maybe
we can ask the question now.
Maybe if the audience has some questions. You know, speaking of acceptance, as I was working on the Biennale, I found this letter by Monet, which that's why I'm bringing it up, who accepts to be in the Venice Biennale in, I think, 1903, but he writes and he says, I'll be in the Biennale, but you really have to help me sell the painting because my financial situation is a complete disaster. So I think, and probably he was at the height of his market, so it's, acceptance is always relative to, particularly the artist never feels accepted.
No, as I said, now the thing is reversed. We curators say we would like you to pay our taxi back home because we don't have enough money to go to Basel. No, but I'm joking. That's.
So if there are questions from the audience.
How would you say Maurizio is filling his time in this environment?
Well, I always use a wonderful quote by Henri Pierre Brochet, who was this great writer. He's the writer of Jules Jim, and he was a good friend of Marcel Duchamp. And he wrote a novel about Duchamp called Victor. And he said a beautiful thing about Duchamp. He said his greatest masterpiece is the use of his time. Because apparently Duchamp couldn't work more than 3 hours a day, and he had found a way to live by selling Brancusi, and so he had created a system in which he could be incredibly busy and incredibly free at the same time. And as a friend and as a colleague and accomplice of Maurizio, I was always shocked in the way he uses his time. You know, when we were working on the Berlin Biennale, Maurizio wakes up very early. I wake up not as early as I would love to, but I would wake up at 7 and I go to the kitchen and Maurizio's been swimming and he's watching TV. And he's watching, like, at the time we were very into 24 Hours, the TV series. So he's watching TV at 7 in the morning, he's watching the TV series, and I think only like an artist or a 9-year-old can watch TV in the morning. And then, you know, like I would go and visit and he's reading like the complete volumes on the Napoleonic Wars, which I don't know how many volumes it is. It's a history of Napoleonic Wars, and he finds the time to do that. So I'm sure the problem is not how he's filling his time. The problem is, does he have enough time to do as much as he wants? And then the doubt is always that maybe what he really wants to do is nothing. And but that's also the beauty of, you know, artists, that we allow them to do what we cannot do. And that's why I was saying he's a bachelor in that sense. The bachelor, as the bachelor machine, is the one that has the luxury of not producing. And that's what makes art great. That there are some people who have the time to waste, and unfortunately humans just have to work. And so I'm glad he's retiring, but I think
now he's very busy with the toilet paper occupy almost his time, because he's doing. Now it's not taking or stealing the pages from the magazine in various novel. It's really creating these images from scratch, so it's a time-consuming activity.
Other questions?
If you don't have any more questions,
I'm sure there are. Any more questions?
the other day at the press conference, people get very upset because Cattelan and Maurizio wasn't here, because there is this obsession to see the real thing. It's more than work. I think this is something strange that happened in the recent time. I think the fact that the work of art is not enough any longer, but there is always a need, the presence of the artist to, I don't know, to make it real or to make it so. Some journalists were very upset because they didn't find him things, and I don't know if you have the same problem. We have always this problem of people asking us how to get Maurizio to go somewhere, no?
Yeah, and well, for many years I would go instead of Maurizio. You know, I gave lectures in universities instead of him. I went to do studio critics instead of him, and sometimes people will get incredibly upset. Like the very first time I did it was at the Bonami Foundation in Venice for the summer school of the New York University. And so it was the first time Maurizio accepted to do a lecture, because he didn't do it, and I went in his place. And so I would give this lecture showing images of his work and talking as if I was him. And usually halfway through, when I would start showing the self-portraits, then I would say that I'm not him. And some people laughed, some others got like very upset, and particularly this time, the very first time, this student sent a letter to the dean and to the Bonami Foundation saying that her parents didn't pay the tuition for her to listen to an imposter. And it happened many times throughout this this strange thing that we would do. And it's a funny coincidence because another big moment of tension was in 2001 when Maurizio was in the Venice Biennale. I was being interviewed as Maurizio for a Finnish television, or a Swedish television, I don't remember. And so I was pretending being him, but I was doing it in front of Richard Serra's sculpture, and I was pretending that the Richard Serra was my piece. And all of a sudden, Richard Serra comes up from like the side of the camera, and he says, "What do you think you're doing?" And I sort of like just left. And then the thing gets even more complicated because the journalist goes home and shows the footage to the editor, and the editor happened to know what Maurizio looked like, and so the editor flips out and threatens to fire the journalist, and so Maurizio and I had to send this letter explaining that somehow he was part of the work, that we weren't trying to fool anybody. And the funniest thing is that this journalist interviewed me a month ago during the Venice Biennale, and we both recognized each other, and happily enough she still has that job, and somehow hopefully that moment in which Richard Serra comes into the camera will become another story in the future.
When did you decide to stop to be Maurizio?
Well, it was around the time of the Berlin Biennale. It became a bit complicated because there was a moment in the Berlin Biennale in which we decided to go to the main cities across Germany and do lectures, because we felt that the Germans didn't take us seriously, and the only way to sort of conquer Germany was to give lectures. You know, there is a famous joke by Erwin Panofsky, the art historian, says that people from Hamburg, if they can choose between going to heaven and a lecture about heaven, they would rather go to the lecture. So we started to do this sort of lecture campaign, city by city, but what happened was that Maurizio wouldn't speak, and Ali was away for a few months, and so I would do these lectures in which I was first myself, then Maurizio, and then Ali. I would like, and after that we would do like interviews in which I was to be myself and I was to be him, and it was becoming more and more complicated, and so around that time we decided to stop.
So did he came out and officially?
No, it was gradual. It was also sometimes, you know, as I was being him, it would always happen that I would pick up a magazine and there was an interview that I didn't do. So I would be like, who the hell did this? You know, like, so I'm sure Maurizio sometimes would answer it himself or get somebody else to do it, and so then gradually we stopped doing it, and then I see Flavio Del Monte here. Then the structure became more, I think, elaborate. Other people were doing it, and Flavio was like the spin doctor, and so it's. I mean, the interesting thing, which in a way is what this piece talks about, and also, I mean, our presence talks about. One thing that, you know, one piece by Maurizio is called La Rivoluzione Siamo Noi, We Are the Revolution. I think it's a title you gave, and it's a title from Joseph Beuys, but it's a title that on many levels represents, I think, what Maurizio's work is about, which is this idea that anybody can be anybody else, and that's a very somehow optimistic element in his work, and often he says that if he made it as an artist, it means that anybody can. And so there is this idea of a multiplicity of beings that inhabit him and that inhabit his...
which he synthesizes here,
yeah,
with the horses.
Yeah, this idea that it takes many people...
Then one word can become many, and
you know, I think one of my texts about him, it takes the sentence from a Thomas Hardy book, and it's called We Are Too Many, which is the sentence that the children write before killing themselves in Testosterville. But this idea that success, or anyway, to do something, to do anything, is a form of participation. I think it's, and of multiplicity. I think that's what this work is about. And the fact that there is not one interpretation, and, you know, we are here to lend our voices and to tell a story that is multiple stories. I think that's what this work is about.
So as you understand, the work is very simple and very strong, but his life is very complicated. Thank you very much.
Thank you.